German soldiers thought their tanks were unbeatable until a Soviet tank appeared and their shells started bouncing off. Imagine you're a German tank commander in the summer of 1941. You've been told that the German army is unstoppable. Your Panzer divisions have crushed Poland, overwhelmed France, and dominated almost every battlefield in Europe. German tanks are considered the best in the world. Then, suddenly, something appears through the smoke. You fire at it. Nothing happens. You fire again. Still nothing. The strange Soviet tank keeps moving forward as if your shells were pebbles. At that moment, many German soldiers realized they were facing something they had never seen before. The Soviet T-34, and it shocked Nazi Germany. When Germany launched Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, Adolf Hitler expected a quick victory over the Soviet Union. German military planners believed Soviet equipment was outdated and inferior. At first, it seemed they were right. German forces advanced hundreds of miles into Soviet territory, capturing enormous numbers of soldiers and destroying thousands of Soviet tanks. But then, reports began arriving from the front. German troops were encountering a new Soviet tank that seemed almost impossible to stop. That tank was the T-34. At first glance, it didn't look particularly revolutionary. But what made the T-34 terrifying wasn't just one feature. It was the combination of several innovations that worked together perfectly. The first shock was its armor. Most tanks in 1941 used vertical armor plates. The T-34 did something different. Its armor was heavily sloped. This may sound simple, but it completely changed how shells interacted with the tank. When a projectile hit a vertical plate, it struck directly. But when it hit a sloped surface, the shell often deflected away or lost much of its penetrating power. In practical terms, this meant the T-34's 45mm armor performed like much thicker armor. German anti-tank crews quickly discovered this problem. Their standard 37mm anti-tank gun, nicknamed the door knocker by frustrated soldiers, often failed to penetrate the T-34. Imagine firing directly at an enemy tank and watching your shells bounce off. That was happening across the Eastern Front. German soldiers were stunned. Many had never encountered a tank so resistant to their weapons. Some reports describe crews firing repeatedly with little effect. Others resorted to aiming at tracks or vulnerable rear sections because frontal attacks often failed. But armor wasn't the only surprise. The second shock was mobility. The Eastern Front wasn't like Western Europe. Roads were often poor or non-existent. Rain could transform fields into seas of mud. Many tanks became trapped or slowed dramatically. The T-34 was designed specifically for these conditions. It had unusually wide tracks. Those wide tracks spread the tank's weight over a larger area, reducing ground pressure. As a result, the T-34 could travel through mud, snow, and rough terrain far better than many German vehicles. German crews often watched in disbelief as Soviet tanks crossed terrain that their own vehicles struggled to navigate. Even when roads disappeared, the T-34 kept moving, and in Russia, mobility could mean survival. Then there was its engine. Most tanks of the era used gasoline engines. The T-34 used a diesel engine. Diesel had several advantages. It provided strong performance and reduced the risk of catastrophic fires compared to gasoline-powered vehicles. The engine helped the T-34 maintain impressive speed while operating across vast distances. For a medium tank weighing over 26 tons, it was remarkably agile. This combination of armor, speed, and cross-country capability created a nightmare for German commanders. But perhaps the biggest shock was psychological. German soldiers entered the Soviet Union expecting technological superiority. Instead, they were suddenly facing a tank that appeared superior to many of their own. One famous German general later admitted that the appearance of the T-34 caused serious concern among military leaders. German intelligence had underestimated Soviet tank development. The realization was alarming. If the Soviets could produce tanks like this, the war in the East would be far more difficult than expected. The T-34's main gun added to the problem. Armed with a powerful 72.2mm cannon, it could destroy many German tanks at combat ranges. German Panzer III and early Panzer IV tanks often found themselves outmatched. The balance of power on the battlefield was suddenly changing. In some encounters, German crews were forced to close dangerously close before having any chance of penetration. Meanwhile, the T-34 could strike effectively from farther away. This wasn't supposed to happen. Germany had expected to dominate Soviet armor. Instead, Soviet engineers had created a tank that combined firepower, protection, and mobility in a way few vehicles had achieved before. Yet the T-34 wasn't perfect. Early models suffered from reliability problems. Crew visibility was often poor. The interior could be cramped and uncomfortable. Communication equipment was sometimes inadequate. Training levels among Soviet crews also varied widely. But even with these flaws, the tank's strengths were impossible to ignore. German engineers immediately began studying captured examples. They examined every detail. The sloped armor impressed them. The wide tracks impressed them. The overall design impressed them. In fact, many historians believe the T-34 influenced future German tank development. Some design concepts seen in later German tanks reflected lessons learned from encounters with the Soviet vehicle. That alone shows how seriously Germany took the threat. As the war continued, the T-34 became one of the most important weapons in Soviet service. Factories produced them in enormous numbers. Even when German forces destroyed hundreds, more kept arriving. Then came the improved T-34-85. Equipped with a larger turret and a more powerful 85mm gun, it became even more effective against German armor. By the final years of the war, the T-34 was helping drive Soviet forces westward toward Berlin itself. What began as a shocking surprise in 1941 became one of the symbols of Soviet victory. In total, more than 80,000 T-34 tanks were produced, making it one of the most manufactured tanks in history. Its influence extended far beyond World War II. Many countries continued using T-34s for decades after the war ended. Some even remained in service into the 21st century. That's a remarkable legacy for a tank designed before the war. So why did the T-34 shock Nazi Germany? Because it shattered assumptions. German commanders believed they possessed the best armored forces on Earth. The T-34 proved otherwise. Its sloped armor shrugged off shells that should have destroyed it. Its mobility allowed it to cross terrain that trapped other vehicles. Its firepower threatened German tanks from significant distances. And perhaps most importantly, it revealed that the Soviet Union was capable of producing world-class military technology. In 1941, that realization sent shockwaves through the German army. And on the battlefields of the Eastern Front, the T-34 became one of the machines that helped change the course of history.